Greetings, everybody. It is Ice Water King, and today I bring to you a topic of a video that I've been having for a while, and one that I actually feel pretty passionate about talking about, especially with today's age of gaming. I have discussed this with friends multiple times, and I have said this on stream once in this infamous clip here of me playing GTA Vice City. So, if you haven't looked at the title, or if you haven't seen the clips, I'm going to be talking about the pandemic, I'm going to say that in quotations, of gaming. And to understand where I'm coming from, we're going to do a little bit of going back in the past to where video games first originated from. When a lot of you think of the very first video game, a lot of you might think of Pong from the 70s. And, well, a lot of you are correct. There have been instances of games being played on computers during the 60s that were like role-playing games. Like, think of Dungeons and Dragons, where you input what you want, and then it relays back information to you, and in your mind, you imagine of what that scenario can be. But to make things simpler, we'll mostly be talking about Pong in the 70s, which is the first ever official video game ever created in this in this video. So, in the 70s, there's Pong that most likely a lot of your parents most likely have played. And it's probably the most iconic piece of media because when you think of very first or retro style video games, you typically think of arcades from the 80s or Pong. And that's really about it. So, what makes Pong so special in the 70s is that this was a time during the middle to end of the Cold War, and technology is starting to expand more rapidly. See, we had the computers of the 60s that are like the size of a fucking room, and then you have them becoming more smaller, and then you have something like Pong, where you'd control a little sliding thingy and you let a bong bounce back and forth, like the real life variant of ping pong. And that's what kind of inspired video games to continue, is doing things that you can kind of do in real life, but in a fantasy kind of thing where you don't risk your life at all. Maybe a bit of your health if you unhealthily play video games, but it was something new and unique. So that is the 70s of video games. And sometimes afterwards, in the 80s, became the most popular form of retro-ish style of video game entertainment. And that is arcades. Arcades are a thing that you pay a token or a quarter or something, and you play a game and that you master it. And whenever my parents specifically talk about playing video games, they mostly talk about arcades because arcades were kind of really popular in the 80s, the 90s, and a little bit of the early 2000s, but that's when arcades started slowly dying out. And obviously you've had your iconic arcade games such as Pac-Man, Mortal Kombat. Actually, that's where Mortal Kombat originally originated from, is in an arcade style. And honestly, kind of do miss arcades in a sense because you had some unique arcade games where instead of a joystick and a couple buttons, you had a actual handheld gun that you pointed at the screen. And it was honestly kind of a cool way to play video games, but also go out to interact with actual humans. And, you know, a place where hip kids in the 80s and 90s could all hang out and have a good time. Because typically at these arcades, there was also, you can get some pizza, soda, and all around just have a good time and then go home. And that's what made arcades honestly enjoyable, and that and their addictive games. And we're still at a point from the 70s to now where video games, as we're going to keep calling it, are addictive and fun and keep coming back for more because arcades also had the adrenaline rush of being the high score. See, if you died in a video game in an arcade, you had a high score, and there was obviously those types of people that, you know, were really, really good at video games, and they had a high score or something. And so then what happens is, it not necessarily esports hearsay, but kind of like a competition locally where people would actually pay to see two people just absolutely duke it out on the stage of an arcade and see who comes out on top. And this is, I think, where esports kind of starts to become kind of where it is now, but kind of like the starting stage of something. So we're now at the arcade stage, and relatively it is still pretty fun. So now let's transition into the 90s, where instead of arcades are slowly becoming a thing, home consoles are starting to become a thing, like the Nintendo and Sega are starting to capitalize on, and in the late 90s, PlayStation as well. Now, the difference between a home console and an arcade was, as the name suggests, it's at home, and you didn't have to play an arcade. You would actually play video games, you would have to physically go to a store and buy a copy, or if you remember this might be a name that brings back a lot of memories. Blockbuster, back in the 90s and early 2000s, you could honestly rent out a game. And honestly, that was the joy of it, because if there was a game you knew came out, you could rent it, see if you like it, and if you don't, you can give it back. Or if you liked it enough, you would give it back and purchase the game fully. Now, this is where home consoles are in today's standards, because nowadays home consoles are everywhere in a lot of people's homes. You've had the Xbox generations, from the Xbox to the current Xbox now, the PlayStation and the Nintendo, and sadly the Sega never really made it past its Sega Genesis. Which is kind of sad, because honestly, Sega had some pretty banger games, and honestly, this is where technology starts to get more and more and more advanced, because now you can actually sit in a living room and play with multiple people at the same time at your own choosing. And this is the era where games popular known as Resident Evil, Doom, and stuff like that start to pop off. And this is probably where a lot of you younger parents out there in your 40s or 30s probably remember playing video games the most. And honestly, if you're a collector of older video games, you honestly respect this innovation era of video games. And again, the 80s to 90s, the graphics were starting to get a little bit more better, and gameplay was honestly starting to become more adaptive and more intricate into the thing, and companies were starting to take risks. Video games were now seen as an actual type of media instead of being backlashed. Obviously, you still have some parents and governments and officials saying that, video games are bad, but that's a discussion for a different topic. But 90s video games, I would honestly call the nostalgic era of video games, because this is where video games started to become more and more mainstream and more in-home things. And this is when companies started to take more risks with consoles and actual games to see what popped off. And now we're here in the 2000s and 2010 mid to 2015. So 2000 to 2015 is where I would say is kind of the golden era of video games, because this is when companies actually, made innovations with consoles like Xbox and PlayStation, and Nintendo were making innovations for gamers to have more fun. Xbox had the higher ground because they, made Windows, so they had the hardware. PlayStation already do what went well for them, because, they, practically snuffed out Sega. And Nintendo was just known for in the previous video, for being the cheaper alternative and being more for, family. And this is when we start to see the three big giants of gaming today: Nintendo, Xbox, and PlayStation. Now, not necessarily these three are the main core issues, but it's more than necessarily of what goes into the future of what makes video games in today's eyes. You see, they actually had innovations. They had people behind the projects actually, invested in what was going on. Like Halo, like Call of Duty, and Battlefield, and all those. You also had Mario, and you also had God of War and other PlayStation exclusives that actually, made sense. And people were actually innovating. Obviously, you had some flops, but that comes with the risk of becoming new. And this is also when video games become more and more mainstream, because more kids are actually invested in playing video games and that. And this is where I'd say the innovation of what video games, what makes them fun at least, this is where they became. Because a philosophical thing of most video games was that you play the game and you earned rewards, and you felt like you actually earned the rewards in the video games. Obviously, between 2010 and 15, there was microtransactions, DLCs, and of course the infamous loot boxes. But other than that, 9 times out of 10, video games of this time more focused on reward and time instead of your money. So now this makes it into today's issue of the supposed pandemic of gaming. What is the issue? And I think it's because that corporations want to make money. Like, don't get me wrong, there is still a lot of amazing video games out there if you're willing to look for it. But for advertisement and stuff like that, there's not a whole lot other than advertising for the 3 top games of today. That is the GTA series, the Call of Duty series, and the Fortnite series. Now, Fortnite is honestly the biggest reason of the supposed pandemic of gaming. And this isn't necessarily Fortnite's fault, per se. It's more of the players' fault. See, you had people seeing Ninja becoming so successful in life that they thought that they could just stream and make it good. So then that spawned a hellfire as sweats began to sweep across the thing, and people got better at building. And then when Fortnite added creative mode, this is where people could, practice and, get good at the game and actually be good. And this spawned in what we know now today as sweats. And this slowly seeped into other aspects of gaming, such as Call of Duty, Apex, like any game where there's people in it. And it's honestly come to a problem where you casually cannot play video games anymore without little Timmy thinking that he is the god of the game when he's got fucking stacks and stacks of homework to do. And you obviously have those creatures in their mom's basement just playing video games nonstop because, they want to stomp on people that are having genuinely a good time. And a lot of companies leaned into this facade. GTA not so much, but other games that, have you actually interact with other people, like Call of Duty, where they just started becoming more business scummy oriented. We already talked about this on the channel here, but for quick crash course is that the Battle Royale genre took over Call of Duty because of what Fortnite did. Not necessarily because Fortnite's fault, but the culture surrounding it. And then it just became about selling bundles and selling battle passes and not actually balancing the game out for casuals to have fun. And obviously, another big contender for this reasoning is the fucking COD community, a majority of them, spoon-feeding you fucking meta builds. And that's been going on for about 4 years, that people are actually kind of sick of it, so that's kind of its own thing. And video games is in its own little thing, is because, well, the economy is not helping, for one. People can't afford to have fun with video games and stuff like that. There are some that can, but that also means that a lot less people are spending money on actual games that are being invested in, and half the time there's not even actual people being in there, because now we have AI and companies are laying off people that actually have passions for this type of game for something that could do it in the fraction of a second that has no soul to it. And honestly, Call of Duty is the biggest rat, or whatever the fuck you want to call it, for this. Because now they're using AI art and actually not paying actual artists. And it just feels scummy towards me, because there's genuine people out there in the world that have a passion for this. And when you don't hire or fire those people that have a passion for a game franchise or anything at all, then that game franchise loses the soul that it once had. So this is where the pandemic of gaming is, where the pandemic is that there's no soul, there's no creativity, and there's no fun anymore other than single-player games. So what I want you to take away from this is that no, gaming isn't dead. No, gaming isn't fun. Gaming is very subjective to depending on who you ask for. Some people like a more competitive style of gaming. Some people like a more, linear style of gaming. It depends on who you ask, but on a broad, sweats, skill-based matchmaking, and scummy business practice is genuinely what the pandemic of gaming is. At the end of the day, this is my opinion. You can disagree with me down in the comments, or if you agree with me, and I haven't explained anything reason, please let me know. I'd like to, further explain myself to you guys. But that's going to wrap it up for today's video. If you like what you see, consider subscribing. Make sure to follow me on Twitch so that you know when I go live next. Or you can join the Discord server, the Sweater Kingdom, if you would like to be part of the amazing community. Or if you would like to enter yourself in the sweater contest. But that's going to wrap it up for today's video. Peace, Kingdom.